What's up everyone, Darcblade here with another Hunter's Guide to Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. In this video I'm going to be bringing you another endgame build, this time for the longsword. Now as always, endgame builds are builds that are constructed from the rarest armour, weaponry, talismans. They also feature a little bit of Krios crafting, but it's not to the extent where the skills on the armour are unobtainable. Now as always, if you find these videos helpful or entertaining, please consider leaving a like on the video as well as subscribing to the channel, as I try to bring you a variety of builds for a variety of different playstyles. Now when it comes to the longsword in Monster Hunter Rise, it's a very strong weapon. Thanks to the sheer amount of counter-attack abilities it has, it's able to forego defensive skills most of the time in favour of offensive ones. So long as the player's skill is up to the challenge of performing its counter-attack moves, you can find that you rarely get hit with the longsword. And for this build I'm going to be showing off an elemental longsword build. It's a little bit of a hybrid build in some respects. It does combine raw attack damage with elemental damage. It has a bit of quality of life added to it, so it should be quite a comfy build for players to use. So for this elemental longsword build, you'll need the following. First of all, you'll need the Flaming Espinasse Brain, the Silver Soul Mill, the Flaming Espinasse Grips, the Onmyo Ateobi, and the Flaming Espinasse Heals. For your Petalace, go with either the Demon Petalace if you want extra damage, or the Absolute Petalace if you want some extra health. As for your talisman, you'll need to get a talisman that can get at least Agitator to level 2 on it. Additional decoration slots are also desired. When it comes to the weapon, well, at its core, this is an elemental build, so it can get away with using any element in the game. But for the demonstration of this build, I'll be showing off the Abyss Bringer Blade, which is the Almudron longsword. So this is a water build. Other longswords of different elements you may want to consider include the Kushala longsword, which will be the ice element, the Magma Almudron longsword, which will cover the fire element, the Valstrax longsword, which will cover the dragon element, and the Tobikudachi longsword, which will cover the thunder element. These weapons give you high elemental rating as well as decoration slots to allow you to create similar builds to what are shown here, but with different elements. As for the Krios crafting, I've gone for an infinity increase and an elemental damage increase. As for the Rampage skill and decoration, I've gone for the Kushala Daora Jewel, which gives us the Kushala Daora Soul, which when we continuously land attacks on a monster, our base affinity will be increased. Now speaking of decorations, you've got a fair few to play around with, but some of these are essential. So first of all, I've gone for Tenderizer Jewels to max out Weakness Exploit. I've then gone for Stream Jewels to max out Water Attack. Remember, if you're using a different weapon with a different element, you'd replace these Stream Jewels to match whatever new element you were using. I've then gone for Cornerstone Jewels, which are kind of optional in all honesty, which gives us the Defiance skill. I've then gone for a Hard Stream Jewel to fully max out the Water Attack, Critical Element Jewels to max out Critical Element, Wirebug Jewels to max out Wirebug Whisperer, Critical Jewels to max out Critical Boost, Sheave Jewels to max out Quick Sheave, and then you'll have a few extras to play around with, to which I've gone for a Brace Jewel for a point in Flinch Free and a Sated Jewel for a point in the Free Meal skill. So if you've done what I've done here, you'll have a build with a raw attack of 362 with a high elemental water rating of 101. You'll have a decent chunk of white sharpness with 5% base affinity, which can easily be 55%, even 75% when you take into account Weakness Exploit and the Agitator skill being in effect. And you also have a strong defense of 768 that is exceedingly strong against fire, strong against ice, but unfortunately slightly weak to the other elements, especially water. As for the switch skills, with this build, these are down to personal preference. So, as for the skills, first of all you'll have Agitator at level 5. Agitator is a buff that kicks in whenever a monster becomes enraged. When this is the case, you'll gain bonus raw attack and base affinity. You'll then have Water Attack at level 5, increasing the water rating and thus the water damage of this build. Remember, if you're going up against monsters who are specifically weak to this element, this damage will be incredibly effective. You also have to remember that you will replace Water Attack to match whatever new element you are using if you've decided to switch the weapons. You'll then also have Defiance at level 5. Defiance is another skill that kicks in when a monster becomes enraged. When this is the case, you'll gain bonus defense, and on top of that you'll become immune to minor tremors, monster roars, and wind effects. You'll also have Attack Boost at level 4, which is a skill that increases the raw attack of a build, and at level 4 or above gives us a percentage bonus to our raw attack. We'll then have Critical Boost at level 3, increasing the damage of our critical attacks whenever they hit a monster, but this only applies to the raw portion of an attack, not the elemental portion. You'll then have Weakness Exploit at level 3. Weakness Exploit is a skill that increases our affinity by up to 50% when we're attacking monster weak points, so we should always be accurate with our attacks to get the most damage. You also have critical element at level 3, which is like critical boost but for the elemental portion of your attack, so when you hit a monster and it crits, it'll deal increased elemental damage. You'll then have Razor Sharp at level 3, which is our main sharpness management skill with this build. Razor Sharp is a skill that 50% of the time when we hit a monster, we'll lose no sharpness. Anyway, you'll then have Spare Shot at level 3, which is a byproduct of the armor we're using. It's not needed on this build whatsoever as it's a gunner skill, so only affects bows and bowguns. You'll then have Quick Sheath at level 3, which allows us to sheath our weapon incredibly quickly, and this applies to the special sheath attacks for the longsword, making it incredibly useful and a great quality of life skill for the weapon. You'll then have Wirebug Whisperer at level 3, which reduces the cooldown on our wirebugs, allowing us to use our Silkbind attacks and moves more often, and on top of that it allows us to hold additional wirebugs for longer periods. You'll then have Burst at level 3, which is a decent offensive skill, which whenever we're attacking a monster and we continuously land hits on it, will gain increased raw attack and elemental attack. You'll then have Spirit Bird Call at level 1. To be honest, it's at more than level 1 thanks to the Krios Crafting on this build, but Spirit Bird Call is still a very useful and quality of life skill that allows random Spirit Birds to come to our hunter instead of our hunter going to the Spirit Birds. So it means that we don't have to go out of our way, as the Spirit Birds will come to our hunter at fixed intervals. But this doesn't apply to arena quests or if you're on PC and you're using mods. You then have Intrepid Heart at level 2. Intrepid Heart is a wonderful skill in Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. Basically, we have a extra bar above our health bar. This little blue bar will start filling up as we deal damage to monsters. Once it's full, should we take a hit that would knock our hunter back, it will completely ignore the hit and reduce the damage taken from that said hit as well. This is very useful for the longsword, as when we perform the Spirit Helmbreaker, there are times where you can get knocked out of the sky. Intrepid Heart allows you to shrug this off, as long as you time your attacks correctly. So it's a little bit of extra insurance. And at level 2, should we get hit, and Intrepid Heart take the hit for us, then another explosion will occur on our hunter, dealing damage to the monster. Anyway, you'll then have Fire Attack at level 1, a byproduct of the armor. Basically, this would only apply if we were using a fire weapon, as it would increase the fire rating and value of that said weapon. So you would have a free decoration slot on this build if you were using a fire weapon. You'll then have Free Meal at level 1, which gives us a small percentage chance at not consuming a potion or other consumable when we use it, helping preserve our supplies. Anyway, you'll then have Flinch Free at level 1, which is a result of our Brace Jaw. That negates minor knockbacks from monsters and especially our allies, although this doesn't really mean anything or do anything when Defiance is in effect. You'll then have Adrenaline Rush at level 1, which is a useful skill, but it is not the most essential skill for the longsword. Adrenaline Rush is a skill that when you perfectly time a dodge, you'll gain bonus raw attack, but most of the time with the longsword we're not dodging attacks, we're countering them. Thus Adrenaline Rush doesn't really come in as useful for the longsword as it does other weapons. It's still a way to increase your damage slightly, but like I said, most of the time we're going to be focusing on our counter attacks. Anyway, you'll then have Embolden at level 1, which is another result and byproduct of our armor, but it's still kind of useful. Embolden is a skill that decreases how long it takes for a hunter to enrage a monster, thus it does work well in unison with the other skills like Agitator and Defiance, as when a monster becomes enraged more, those skills will kick in. But when a monster does become enraged, Embolden will also increase our defense even more, and on top of that, it will provide us extra invincibility frames when dodging. And finally, you'll also have Element Exploit at level 1. This is a useful skill that increases elemental damage when attacking monster body parts that are extremely weak to elemental damage. So once a body part has a weakness rating of 20 or above, Elemental Exploit will mean that we'll deal bonus elemental damage to that body part on a monster. So there we have it, those are all the essential skills for this elemental longsword build. Let's quickly move on to talk about the Krios Crafting. Now when it comes to the Krios Crafting, as I've said many times, I normally go for decoration slot upgrades or additional decoration slots to allow more customization with our builds. So you rarely see my builds that feature all attack boost or attack boost and lots of critical eye, or attack boost and lots of weakness exploit, so on and so forth. So for the Flaming Espinasse Brain, I've got an additional tier 1 decoration slot. For the Silver Soul Mill, I've got a tier 4 decoration slot upgrade, as well as a reduction in the fire attack. For the Flaming Espinasse Grips, I've got a additional tier 1 decoration slot and a point in the Spirit Bird core skill. For the Onmyo Eterbi, I've got a point in the Burst skill, and then for the Flaming Espinasse Heals, I've got an additional tier 1 decoration slot, a tier 2 decoration slot upgrade, and a point in the Spirit Bird core skill again. This unfortunately is wasted, as we already have the Spirit Build core skill elsewhere on this build. But regardless, all the builds out there, these endgame builds, they all come with various pros and cons. No build is absolutely perfect. When it comes to this elemental longsword build, its biggest pro is its damage output. Combining raw attack with elemental damage, you're able to bring down monsters quite quickly, especially if you take into account their elemental weaknesses. On top of that, this build is interchangeable with other weapons, so you can use pretty much any element. And the final pro for this build is that it comes with quality of life skills. Defiance, Quick Sheave, Wirebug Whisperer, Razor Sharp and more. These all add to the quality of a hunt and make it feel slightly easier and more comfy than it maybe is. But of course there are cons. One of the biggest cons for this build is it is a decoration heavy build, unfortunately. And yes, we can craft our decorations in Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. Some of the decorations I've featured are very high tier ones. And the other con is this build lacks evasion skills. But that being said, the longsword generally doesn't need evasion skills, as it can rely on its counter attacks as its main source of defense. So overall this build is very strong. Like I said, as long as you're taking into account a monster's elemental weakness, this build can bring down monsters quickly. I know there are some monsters who are fairly resistant to elements, and so this build may not be the most effective against those, but when you're going up against a monster that is particularly weak to a certain element, then this build can finish the hunt quickly. But what are your thoughts? Please leave a comment down below, and until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you another endgame build, this time for the longsword in Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.